On today's episode of Locked On Mets, we're talking the MLB draft and the Shohei Ohtani trade that got away with the prospects the Mets outdealt the last couple of years. Going to be a fun show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You are watching Locked On Mets. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein, joined today by Aram Leighton, co-founder of JustBaseball.com and one of the best prospect analysts out there. We're going through the Mets draft today, and we're also going to talk, we'll do this a little bit later, about just a bad friend move at lunch the other day where Aram looks at me and says, hey, the Mets could have traded for Shohei if they weren't just horrible at making trades the last couple of years, but we're going to get to that later. We're going to talk about the draft first. I want to jump right into the first pick the Mets made, Colin Houck. What did you think about the Mets selection getting a high school shortstop?
Yeah, man. Well, first of all, sorry for that. And I'm glad we're going to get to subject the Mets fans to that comment as well, because it's just kind of an example of sometimes you don't know what you got in your own farm, but the Mets are regenerating pretty nicely here. But specifically with Houck, this is somebody that I think slipped a little bit because he didn't have that one tool that jumps off the page. And with that same notion, I loved him because there was almost no hole in his game to poke. I saw potentially above average tools across the board. In our mock, in our final mock, we had him going, well inside of the first round, somewhere in that 20 range. And, I thought this was a great get for the Mets, especially when you look at the kind of guys that they've been trying to draft lately, when they do go high school. Jet Williams, I think it's kind of similar to that. And I just think you need to have more of those guys. Is every high school prep shortstop going to work out? No. But I think we're seeing that the level of competition in high school is just better and better and better. And if you see a guy that, hey, that hit tool looks legit, that looks like an above average hit tool in high school, sometimes it didn't used to translate as clearly. Now it is. If you feel confident in a guy's approach and feel to hit, you're seeing it translate. And I think this is a guy that's going to, kind of hit the ground running better than most high school draftees.
It's interesting you mentioned Jet Williams, because that was the player I was going to ask you about, comparing him to Houck. And also you're talking about that type of, high school player, Brett Beatty, now at the big league level, a guy that was kind of a similar, pedigree back then. So Houck and Williams, 2 years in a row, they kind of go this route. The similarities there, is it just guys that are good at baseball that could potentially play anywhere on the diamond at some point when they eventually get to the big league level?
Well, that's the other side of it too. When you draft a shortstop out of high school, I think, you're kind of looking at, even if he moves off of it, what kind of player is he going to be? And when I look at Houck, I think he can stick it short. I really do. He's a really good athlete. I think he was a legitimate quarterback recruit as well.
Oh yeah.
Out of high school. So it kind of just shows you what kind of arm and what kind of athlete he is. So I think he's going to stick it short, but even if he moved off to second or third, I think there's enough juice there to be able to, provide above average offense at third or to play an elite second base. But I think the reason why he is such a good draft prospect and a guy that I thought would be in the 20 to 25 range in the first round, even maybe a little bit earlier than that, was that it's above average across the board. I think you could go 50 to 55 grades across the entire board. And I think there's a little bit of room for strength there. He's about 6'2", 185 pounds. You could probably add a little bit more muscle and tap into a bit more power. If he does that, there's a lot to like across the board. This just felt like a safe pick and just a really well-rounded player. What's interesting is I think he's a little bit older than some of the other guys that were kind of drafted in his range in the back half of the first round out of high school. And sometimes draft models, like very model-driven teams, will be thrown off by that. But that could have been the opportunity here to get a player that I really didn't think would be available at 32, the best way to put it.
And that right there is another comparison to Brett Beatty. He was also, I think, older than his class a little bit. And we think that pick's going to work out for the Mets. We're not going to talk about the current Mets players right now, but Beatty, actually, you know what? Let's touch on it since I'm there. What do you think? You think Brett Beatty right now, who's struggling a little bit at the big league level, is this just a player getting his feet wet? who's maybe dealing with the mental side of things a little bit on a team that's struggled a lot, where he's been asked to do a lot, and maybe that's getting to him, and that's why we've seen a little bit of a regression to who he was in 2021, hitting the ball on the ground so much.
Yeah, I'm not entirely worried about Brett Beatty. I know when you're watching him day in and day out struggle in the big leagues, it's a little different. I understand that, but this is a really talented hitter. I have seen that, regression back to balls on the ground, expanding the zone a little bit, and I think that kind of comes with the territory of big league pitchers kind of learning how to get you out. But this is a tough spot for a rookie to be in. You get the New York media, which I think he's handled exceedingly
Yeah.
every single time they ask him. I think he's shown enough flashes that you can see what he's capable of. I know he missed the fly ball the other day, but I still think overall the glove is looking pretty good. Also, did you see that like 3D graph that they showed? That ball did some crazy stuff, man. I like a big league third baseman doesn't miss that, even if they're not good at defense. So I didn't see that as like a knock on Beatty, but I understand it's frustrating. I think he's in a really tough spot for a rookie. I also think fastballs have been getting on him a little bit quickly, and that's been a little bit of the issue. I think if he can kind of work through the timing issues and just continue to get more at bats, if the Mets are out of it, like let this kid play the entire year. I bet you by next year he'll be more than comfortable. Most guys take a few hundred at bats to really get comfortable and get going. And, we'll see how he does in the second half, but I wouldn't be surprised if he picks it up.
Yeah, he's at about 250 plate appearances on the season. So yeah, I also think he's got keys to third base for the rest of the year if the Mets are winning or not. Let's get back to the draft. Brandon Sproat, pitcher the Mets drafted last year out of Florida. They get him again, and they also keep the comp pick for him. So a nice little maneuver there. Not that it was an intentional one, but they clearly like this guy. They drafted him twice. What do you think about the pick?
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that the UF arms were very polarizing in the respect that they all are extremely talented. You saw Hurston Waldrop as well, someone that could have went in the second round or ended up going to the Braves there early or in the first round, which I thought was kind of a reach. Some people liked Waldrop a lot better than Sproat. Some people like Sproat more than Waldrop. It became this like, where do you stand on the pitching philosophy aisle? With Sproat, I think he's a little bit safer than Waldrop. I think Waldrop has a little bit more upside, but that's why one was nabbed in the second round and one was nabbed in the first round. But I like the pick here. The Mets are looking for as many arms as they can accumulate, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is the one arm that I see could be a middle of the rotation starter at the big league level. I mean, it's hard to teach 96 to 97. He can touch, upper 90s, and I think he's been up to 101, which, that's some special arm talent. The command of it is not great, but if that comes along, now you got a plus fastball. What's most impressive to me, and it almost feels backwards, is the changeup is fantastic, and his feel for the changeup is fantastic. He landed it for a strike 66% of the time, and that gives him a pretty solid floor. If you have a good changeup and you can at least even moderately locate your fastball, you're in good shape. And he actually spins the breaking balls pretty well too. I think the number one X factor for Sproat is fastball command. And I know that's a big X factor, but a lot of these guys are usually 60% fastball, can't really find the secondaries, and then there's even more pressure on the fastball being a big whiff pitch. He's got 3 secondaries that he threw for a strike more than 60% of the time. And he's got a fastball that can touch 101. So if he can just command that fastball, and I'm sure, having professional pitching coaches can kind of help you work with that. Mike Vasil saw major strides with his command. Blade Tidwell has continued to improve with his command. If Sproat can do that, I think he's more talented than both those arms just from a raw talent perspective by a good deal. So this will be a good test for the Mets pitching development, which I know every fan base thinks their team's pitching development stinks except for like a couple. But I do think that this is an opportunity to unlock a first round talent that just didn't perform like a first round pitcher over the last year or so, which is, a good test.
And, speaking of developing a UF pitcher, they have a guy in Christian Scott right now they're having a lot of success with. He's put up some really good numbers this year. He seems to have taken a massive leap under this new pitching lab they're trying to develop. Everyone wants to have a pitching lab. The Mets try to fancy themselves as a team that's going to have one. And these are the type of arms that come through that get you excited about what could be. I want to talk about a two-way player, not Ohtani yet. The Mets drafted one. So we're going to get to that in just a minute. Before we do, Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure that every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage. Look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay's guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. So the Mets drafted a two-way guy, and I don't know if he could hold as a two-way guy, but they got one. Nolan McLean in the third round. We'll start there. Which one do you see him making it to the big leagues with more? Is it as a pitcher or a hitter? Do you see him more as an arm or a bat?
I'd say an arm. And it's funny because he's pretty similar to someone that was drafted out of Oklahoma. Of course, he's Oklahoma State, but Cade Horton, more talented arm, of course, and he was the number 7 overall pick in the draft, but two-way guy that didn't really get to focus on pitching because he had Tommy John surgery and he was also looking to hit and only threw like 50-something innings in college. And the Cubs drafted him and worked on him, and all of a sudden he looks like one of the better pitching prospects in baseball. I don't know if McLean's quite going to have that arc, but I think the Mets were looking at this as an opportunity to snag a guy that hadn't really focused on one thing in particular, because not only was he a pitcher and a hitter, he also was a football player, a good one, and wanted to walk on to the team at Oklahoma State. His freshman year was a walk-on, didn't see any action, but you know that that's going to take away from your focus on baseball. And then going into his sophomore year, I think kind of gave up the whole football thing and focused on baseball, and then had an injury. So that kind of affected him too. I think with McLean, the arm talent is the most impressive thing. You know, there's power at the plate, but there's a lot of whiff there, and I don't know if that's going to translate. But in the third round, to get a guy that's up to 98, nasty slider, pretty good feel for the curveball already as well. And I think with those 3 pitches, nobody's really touched him much on the pitching side. Like, I do think that there's a lot that can be unlocked here. This is another one of those projects for the Mets. I think they were really looking at how much upside can we get? You know, what arms can we really mold into something much better than they are? And I think McLean could be that. He does a good job of keeping the ball on the ground, does get a fair amount of whiff. We'll see how the command kind of comes along. But this is a guy that has a lot more to unlock in that arm, big body, and I think showed flashes of what could be an upper 90s fastball.
And that's clearly the Mets' mode of operation here was grab pitching. I want to circle back to Boston Barrow because I want to stay on the pitching side of things. For one, let's actually touch on Christian Little really quick. A guy that you like, Mets drafted in the 19th round, but he is still unsigned. Kind of thinking he might go back to LSU, right?
Yeah, that seems to be the word. And, you know, I thought that might be the case. I liked them taking a chance on him just to see what the deal was, because he's a guy that he is so talented, just has not put it all together. Big pitcher's body, good athlete, good fastball, but just has not found the feel for the secondaries. He's going to go back to school. But I think when the Mets draft you, like, it's been kind of clear that there's like a message there that, hey, like, we have interest in you and we'll be interested in taking you again. So Little will go back to LSU, try to build up his draft stock a little bit. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Mets took him again.
They won't get a comp pick this time, though. You get comp picks for what, the first like 3 rounds, something like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so getting to their draft as a whole here, 15 pitchers, 13 of them right-handed pitchers, for whatever that's worth, 7 position players, 17 college players, 6 high schoolers. That's a team to me that is struggling with pitching depth in the upper levels in the minor leagues, and of course at the big league level. And it's just saying, let's get arms, let's churn them out, and we'll figure out the position player side of things. They did take a couple of shots on some guys, but it is clear that they are trying to get their farm system full of some pitchers here.
100%. Yeah, you can just see them stockpiling as many arms and college arms as they can, which is interesting. And I was joking with you before we were recording. I was like, I feel like they are trying to find the next Mike Vasil here, where we're going to get a college arm in rounds 4 through 7 or 8. And just see if we can unlock a little bit more and get them rolling from there. But I think also there's high school arms that you can draft. They're going to be more expensive and they're high risk. There's nothing more. The only thing more risky than a high school righty is a high school catcher. So when you look at what they're doing here, I think they're saying, hey, even if this guy ends up being a bullpen arm or ends up floating in the 20 to 25 range in our top 30 prospect list, no matter, and I know teams pretend they don't pay attention to that, but at the end of the day, like that's where a lot of trade value and things comes from. So I think that they're just looking to build organizational depth with their pitching. And I mean, the way to do it, I think, is what they did. Take college arms and give them right around the slot value and, spread yourself across the board here and just throw a bunch of irons into the fire. And I think you have to figure, if you play the percentages with a lot of these college arms that all have solid stuff, and we can dive into a couple specific ones if you want. I have, a little bit on everybody. If one or two of these guys makes a leap, you feel really good about it. And then if the rest of the guys can just be serviceable minor league arms, you just improved your depth by a good deal in one draft.
Yeah. And, you mentioned Mike Vasil and trying to find the next Mike Vasil. I want you to, since you have something on everyone, I don't want to, go through each player. You don't have time for all that, but give me two. You look through and find two out of the list that you look at and you say, right tweak here and there. All of a sudden, in a couple years, they could be pitching in the futures game like Mike Vasil was. And I also want to ask you about that. But first, give me just a couple on a few of these guys that Mets drafted.
Yeah, so Austin Troser, I hope I'm saying that right. I've watched him pitch more than I've practiced pronouncing his name. He's interesting to me. He was their, I guess their 4C pick, which is always weird. I'm always like a 4C again. But he was the second 4C pick. But yeah, he's really interesting because he's younger on the college side, just turned 21 years old. Fastball command's really good. And the secondaries have flashed above average. He's got a decent slider and a decent changeup, but just no feel for the changeup. From what I saw, there's a lot of non-competitive pitches. But again, that's kind of a trial and error. Just keep throwing those pitches and try to get better with it. And also in college, if you got a good fastball, which his is 94 to 96, touching 8, you can go fastball slider and just get a lot of hitters out at that level. And they were mostly using him out of the bullpen. I think that was part of it as well. I'm interested to see how they use him and what their plan is, but I just have a good feeling that this guy's going to be a big league arm in some capacity. And when you're getting that in the fourth round, that's pretty solid in the late fourth round. But that's a guy that I really like. And then Cade Morris was a guy that I thought could go a little bit earlier, and just kind of pulling up some of the notes I had on him going into the draft. Another guy that's just turned 21, but I loved the two pitches that he already has kind of a good feel for. The fastball shape could be a bit better, which is kind of perfect for the pitching lab, right? Can we tweak this guy's shape, get a little bit more life under it, and see what he can do there? I think some of the numbers were inflated because he had to pitch in some brutal environments. He had some blow-up starts at New Mexico State, which is a launch pad, and some other places as well. At pretty much everywhere you play in that conference, playing with Nevada, like you're going to be pitching in some bad environments. So it's an opportunity to ID some underrated pitchers. But I think he could take his slider to a bullpen. Like that gives him a high floor. But the fastball is 93, 94, touching 95 frequently, I think up to 7. And the feel for the sliders there. The changeup is better than most of the other guys that you're going to find in this range of the draft. And he sprinkles in kind of like that strike stealing curve as well. There's a lot of similarities to Vasil and those types, in my opinion, just because he has the 4 pitches present, the fastball velocity's there. And if the shape's tweaked a little bit, he could have at least that fastball and slider looking above average. Those 2 other pitches could just be, taste breakers and third or fourth offerings. But I think Cade Morris also has room to add more velocity. 6'3", 170 pounds. He could probably throw on a little bit more weight. He's pretty lanky. There could be some potential here.
They get Cade Morris as the comp pick for Sproat, and they get Sprout. So nice little move there. And then I'm pretty sure they also, I think that 4C there, I think that was the comp for Chris Bassett. The Mets, because they're going to be a ridiculous luxury tax team for the next couple of years, they're not going to be able to draft in the first round much. They're going to have to hit on these comp picks they get, whether it's their players that sign elsewhere or however else they can get these extra vehicles, or even if they're just drafting in these middle rounds. And I think, trying to identify some guys with upside coming from a place like Nevada, that's pretty smart. I want to talk about the last pick that we haven't mentioned yet, that we want to spend some time on, Boston Barrow, and also that Shohei Ohtani trade the Mets have sent away. We're going to get to all that. First, though, another word from our sponsors. All right, we'll close on the draft here and then go to that trade package. Boston Barrow committed to UCLA, signed way over slot, $700K, so about $500,000 over slot. Before we talk about the player, we were the other day at lunch talking about just luring that high school talent. And I told you he was one of the guys they put in front of the media. They put him at the ballpark. He had this picture taking the whole deal. How much does that mean to a high school player getting that opportunity to go to Citi Field for a day and put on a Mets jersey?
Oh, dude, I know that was part of the negotiation process. Obviously, he's not taking less money for like a spin around Citi Field, but I can guarantee the pitch was, hey, you're a big part of what we're doing. That's why we want to give you way over the slot value. The second you sign, you're coming to the ballpark with our first and second round picks. Like, that's how important you are. You're a focal point of this draft class. And, it means a lot because, I mean, it's not empty words. He was there and he was important to them. So I think it shows you how much the Mets feel about Barrow potentially being a legitimate, prospect for them and a pretty projectable high schooler.
And it's with that as a projectable high school. What do you see here that the Mets are getting in the 8th round?
Yeah, I mean, to get a high school kid and get him to sign is pretty impressive there. So they identify a guy that was signable, relatively speaking. Of course, they had to go over slot, but I really liked the idea of the left-handed hitting shortstop with physical projection and already a little bit of present power. He uses the whole field really well. I think his field of hits pretty good. He showed out very well against good competition. He went to Mission Viejo High School to high school in Mission Viejo, which is just a hotbed for talent. And I think it was a different high school just outside of there. But California kid, performed in the West Coast, performed on the summer circuit. Swing looks good. Physical projection. Even if he moves off of short, which I think was one of the kind of knocks, is I don't know how quick he is. I don't know if he's going to be able to stick there. I think the bat really projects well. If he moves to second, though, that's just fine. But I think he could even handle third if he continues to tap into more power. And I think he's pretty advanced with his approach overall. So that's definitely a nice get for them and a player that, relatively speaking, is pretty battle tested through the summer circuit and against good high school competition.
Last year the Mets were able to add, Kevin Parada, Jet Williams, Blade Tidwell. They did very well. Seems like they had a nice draft this year. It's good to bring talent back into the organization because at times when your GM's Billy Epler, or if I think it was Zach Scott that traded Pete Crow Armstrong, you send out talent. And again, bad friend move. You looked at me and said the Mets could basically trade for anyone in baseball with these three guys they've given up. So run the listeners through the trade package that the Mets have sent away that they could have right now to be armed with at the deadline.
Yeah. And obviously where the Mets are at right now probably doesn't make sense to make the move for Ohtani. But, I was thinking about it the other day and I was thinking, okay, we're updating our top 100 list at justbaseball.com. And Pete Crow Armstrong is going to be in the top 25. He was in the top 25 preseason, and Andy Rodriguez was in the top 25 preseason. You might remember Andy Rodriguez was swapped for Joey Lucchesi, Pete Crow Armstrong for Javier Baez. And then Hector Rodriguez is a guy that might enter the back end of the top 100. He's kind of right on the border right now as we finalize the list. Probably will be a just missed guy. He was traded for Tyler Naquin to the Reds. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, what could you get with those three prospects? And then shortly after, they come out with the Angels are looking for 2 top 100 guys and maybe another piece for Shohei Ohtani. And I'm thinking, man, 2 top 25 guys and then a fringe top 100 guy could probably get you almost anybody in baseball. Forget Shohei Ohtani. That might get you like Dylan Cease. So it was, and I know that sounds backwards, but Cease with multiple years of control. But yeah, you could pretty much have gotten anybody you want with those prospects. But,
it's crazy because this is what we'll see a ton of. We'll see a lot of these trades, and every fan base that makes a trade, and let's say they acquire Lucas Giolito or Michael Lorenz, and it's, we just sent some 18-year-old. Who cares who that is? Last year, I said, who cares who Hector Rodriguez is for Tyler Naquin? Oh, the Mets could use another outfielder. And now Hector Rodriguez, like you said, fringe top 100 guy. Let's just run through those three guys real quick. So what have you seen from Hector Rodriguez that has led to this massive jump this year? I know he's had a big season.
Yeah, really advanced swing, man. And putting up good numbers power wise in a graveyard that is the Florida State League. It looks really good so far. He had a B swing, meaning like just like this, like, butt out, throwing the hands out, kind of fooled swing that on a home run that I was like, how did this kid get that out? So it's the feel to hit, it's the power, it's still the untapped potential. And there's a lot to like there. And I mean, but it's not just the Mets. I mean, the Rays picked up Junior Caminero, who's going to be probably the number 2 prospect on our top 100. I'm giving away some of the rankings here for Tobias Myers, a righty who they ended up DFAing the Guardians. So, I mean, like the Guardians gave away a top 3 prospect in baseball. Junior Caminero could get you almost anybody as well. So it's just amazing how that happens. A lot of times it doesn't happen. We only remember the bad ones, but the timing for the Mets and the rate at which they've traded away some really good prospects has been kind of fascinating. I also realized, before I forget, and before we wrap up, I have a better answer than the other 2 guys I mentioned for like the next Mike Vasil.
Oh yeah.
Because I just was looking at my notes and I'm like, wait, this guy's way better. So we can wrap with that. But yeah, Rodriguez looks pretty good. Obviously, he's still a ways away. But in terms of a trade asset, he's definitely worth a lot more now. All I'll say is you wouldn't be trading him for Tyler Naquin now.
Now, I do want to get into that arm. I also want to hear your thoughts about Vasil at the futures game, but let's just stay on this package real quick because I've spoken about Pico Armstrong enough. He was such a high-profile guy. Everyone knows who that is. Not a lot of people know who Endy Rodriguez is, who just got called up by the Pirates. Yep. What have you seen from him that has allowed him to make jump into top 100 list and then now get promoted?
Yeah, and he's kind of trying to get it adjusted to the big leagues as so many guys do. But switch hitter with just an elite feel to hit, plus hit tool, borderline plus, above average power that he gets into in games pretty consistently because he hits them all in the air so much. Good defender, awesome dude. We just interviewed him on the Call Up podcast, and he was just such a good dude. Makeup's off the charts. Pitchers love working with him. Just one of the more well-rounded catchers you're going to find. Of course, Mets have Francisco Alvarez, so they don't need him, but Endy could have been, a pretty nice trade chip there to go get somebody.
It's rough. It's rough when those trades come back to haunt you and haunt you so very quickly.
Yeah.
Let's get to those last little notes. Give me that other pitcher that reminds you of Vasil, and also tell me what you saw from Vasil in the future. I mean, just what you've seen this year as he's made that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think when I was talking about Trosser, like, might be a little bit more of a reach compared to this guy. And I hope I'm saying his name right too, because again, it's just brutal sometimes, like trying to memorize all the pronunciations. But Wyatt, I'm going to say it's Wyatt Hudpole.
Okay.
I think. But the kid from Charlotte. This was a fun video dive for me, and this was a fun data dive from UNC Charlotte. He got a little bit underslot there in the 4th round. Doesn't have the fastball velocity as these other guys, and that's going to be the interesting thing to monitor. But that was kind of a knock on Vasil was fastball's okay, but he has a good feel for the other pitches. I was really impressed with how frequently he was landing all of his secondaries for a strike. Changeup strike rate is 68%. Curveball strike rate is near 70%. He's got a cutter as well, which has really been a popular pitch for guys that don't have elite stuff to be able to mix in that cutter and get weak contact. Throws that cutter at 86, landed that for a strike at a 70% rate. So this is a guy that I think can just, even if he doesn't tick up at all, can churn out quality starts, can give you really good outings. And he had some appearances where he was downright dominant. He punched out 17 against Old Dominion, which Old Dominion's not like some total slouch of a program. And this was right after he got shelled at Virginia Tech. Of course, Virginia Tech's better competition, but to bounce back and strike out 17 after getting knocked around the start before, I think says a lot. I think he had 4 or 5 outings, maybe even 6 with double-digit Ks just off of that ability to mix so many different pitches. The last thing I'll say is what stood out to me is even if the fastball ticks up, he's really going to look like a potential dude because he's really more 92, 94 now with kind of flat shape. But when you got those 3 secondaries, first time through the lineup, he'll show the changeup and the curve more or just show the cutter more. And then second time through, he'll start showing you the cutter and the curve more, maybe hide the changeup a little bit. Like he gives you different looks each time through, which really helps him kind of, I'd say, stay deep into games and avoid his fastball from getting hit too much and being predictable, which is really good.
Yeah, no, I mean, that shows you a guy that, could stick as a starter. Absolutely. Lastly, Vasil, you got to watch him pitch. You've been on him all year. What have you liked about his jump this season?
Yeah, it's been really fun to watch. And I anointed Blade Tidwell as, my favorite pitching prospect in the system before the year after watching him on the backfields. And by the way, Tidwell's been really good lately. But Vasil, with the way he's throwing from a consistency standpoint, I think is kind of, separated himself from the other arms in the system, though I think Tidwell's kind of sneaking back in here. It's the command, but also the way that every pitch looks the same out of his hand. From that release point, he makes that fastball look like the slider until it's too late. And that's why he picks up a 36% chase rate on his slider. So hitters really can't tell the difference until it's about 15 feet away from them. Then he mixes in that changeup that it's inconsistent, but it has great shape and movement to it. Really late fade. Again, really hard to differentiate from the fastball. And then that strike stealing curve. But it's the fastball slider is that 1-2 punch that really helps him. And then the changeup has just been an awesome pitch to get lefties out. Lefties have had just a 580 OPS against him. Righties have been a bit more successful because he's not, he kind of leaves the fastball up sometimes and has to throw the fastball a little bit more to righties. But I think that's something that's going to continue to get better. And I think the feel for the changeup overall, it could end up being a pitch that he goes right on right with plenty. But it's the feel for the secondaries and an improved fastball that has Vasil looking like, a potential solid big league starter. And you talk about tunneling all the time. This is a guy that tunnels really well. All of his pitches play up because they look the same, up until they're about 15, 20 feet away, which helps big time.
So I think that Vasil's a guy, there's an outside chance we see him at the end of this season, but next year in particular, I imagine that he's really factoring into the Mets rotation mix at some point. What's the ceiling you would put on him as far as how good he could be at the big league level?
It's funny. I think his ceiling and floor are very close. I think his ceiling's probably a solid 4. And then I think the floor is like an average 5, so I think there's a really close ceiling floor here, but you need guys like that. People hear 4 and they're like, oh, but you know how hard it is to just identify 4s and develop them. Like teams would love to just continue to develop number 4 starters, especially where they drafted him. I'd say maybe the 4 is more of a swing man because, anything can happen, but I think there's a really good chance that he could be a really solid 4, which everybody needs. I'd say somebody like Tidwell has higher upside because the fastball has so much jump to it, big time in zone whiff, and the slider can be pretty devastating, but his floor is, 7th inning reliever or 6th inning reliever. So that's the difference here that you're working with between these two kinds of prospects.
And, people might want to knock the idea of a 4. Have any of you been watching Tyler McGill pitch the last couple of years? I think that shows you that a good 4 would go a long way. That's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. Thank you so much to Aram Leighton for coming on. His top 100 updates coming out soon. Always a ton of great prospect stuff at justbaseball.com and on his Call Up podcast. So make sure you check all that stuff out. Follow us, rate us, review us wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter, Finkelstein Ryan. And follow the show at Locked On Mets.